There he is. Welcome, sir.
Gentlemen, how we doing?
Man, it's doing all right. Energy
Great start.
transformation.
Great start. Very exciting.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time to put some slides together for us. Brian Scott, from my opinion, and we crossed paths in posts in LinkedIn, and I said, hey, one of the references used fossil fuels, and I said, that's a term that should have died in the 80s. At the same time, the term peak oil should have died in the 80s. And BHP CEO said it best. He said, somebody asked him, hey, are we at peak oil? And he goes, well, the idea of peak oil, by the way, I'm going to change the whole definition of this right now, is what the CEO was really saying. He goes, it's more about what the planet is using, the consumption of oil, not that we're actually running out of oil. It's more about how much are we using? And that was his term of peak oil. And when that came out, I was like, all right, that's BHP CEO saying it. I'm saying it, right? This is fine. There's no existence of peak oil. We'll never run out of that efficient lubrication, energy, and everything else petroleum brings. But however, we do have incredible renewable technology that's outside of the hydrocarbon technology, and that's solar, wind. Anyone that's driving from California to Vegas can see that huge solar farm with the big mirrors that are chasing the sun and creating energy for San Francisco, supposedly. So this technology is real. And all these industries truly do exist, and they have a fight. They have a seat at the table. And right now, COVID has shut down demand. We are now pressed. And what are we all doing together? We're aggressively attacking the change. We're looking at this correctly and hopefully unbiased. And we're saying, what is actually efficient today? Oil and gas, that business is stable. And there is no reason to replace that in our perspective. And I'll let you speak here in a minute, Brian, of course. But that's stable, and it needs to be stable. It needs to be understood that it's stable, because what we're actually getting is efficient energy around the world to 100%. That's going to happen in our lifetimes. And it's up to us to manage this situation for our children and for the generations to come. So if that is stable and it is renewable, it's part of the processes of Earth, accept that as fact. And now let's invest our time and attention into the right renewable technology. Energy transformation, as a basic understanding, is that if we could create something that takes zero input, there's no energy that goes in, it just makes 100% energy. That's 100% efficient energy transformation. That's perpetual motion. It doesn't exist, but we can get close. We can get close, and it's up to us to make sure what is actually going to happen in the next 20, 40 years of energy transformation. Brian Scott, sir, honored to share this time with you and Skips on this subject.
I really appreciate the invite, Troy and Skips. I do. I've had the luckiness to meet you, Troy. Pub beer. I got a Canadian Pilsner here.
Hey,
not
in
too
a
bad.
glass, man.
In a glass, well,
Skip,
we were drinking a Pilsner, a Canadian Pilsner. It's not too fancy. You throw it in a glass, you pretend it is. That's about it.
Cheers, brother.
But it's one of those things. I think you very much know I'm a big believer in clean energy. I am, but I'm also a realist, right? And it's one thing we've talked about. We talked about it just the other day. I believe in building bridges, having these conversations. Everybody needs to be talking to each other so that we can make the best decisions, the best choices for our society as a whole. We're all going to have different opinions, different political backgrounds, all that sort of stuff, but that doesn't really matter, right? And what something Skip said when we were talking the other day was the economics, right? That's what it really comes down to, that everybody can agree on. That is, it's hard to debate, right? There can be those conversations as to maybe other effects of any energy source, whether it be emissions or anything else, like negative for on either side, right? We need to look at the full picture, and we need to be able to appreciate each other's side, right? Like myself, I'm not a geologist. I don't even pretend to be. And I worked in the oil industry, as you know, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And I had a great time. It was a great industry with some very hardworking people. And I watched the opening segment there, and that's over my head. I learned a lot of stuff, but it's very much, some really smart people talking about stuff that isn't my strength. And I love learning from it. It's great. So I thought that was awesome.
Thanks, man.
But one thing I focus on is the electricity grid, right? That's my interest, is the electricity grid. And that's where when we talk about oil, just to kind of turn back here, we talk about oil, it's not going anywhere. I completely agree with you. It's a forever conversation. When people even talking about energy, oil isn't just energy. It's a million different things.
Right.
So when people on kind of my side of the fence get a little too excited, like, I live in Alberta. It's the oil sands, right? And we're a big target, especially for clean energy people. And they'll say, "Oh, let's shut down the oil sands tomorrow." Well, that's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen for a long time. Let's be realistic. But anyway, just kind of getting to some of the stuff I want to talk about and kind of initiate this. I'll share my screen here.
All right, let me see.
If you can set me up.
I'm going to set you up now.
This is very, very simple. I just kind of initiating the discussion more than anything.
No, greatly appreciated.
And then
please,
just to preface this, audience participation per usual, right?
Love
so
it.
fire those questions away.
Yeah. Beat me up.
And
likewise, man. Likewise, beat me up.
Okay, so we're talking about electricity grids. One thing that is very much underappreciated. I'm a Canadian, as you guys know, so I'm probably in the minority here. But one thing that we do share in North America is a lot of electricity, right? You can see these different grids. You can see the Western connection. I'm in Alberta here. There's a lot of lines going up and down, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in the prairies, over here in the MRO. Even
goes across borders with no problem.
Absolutely, and it's sold across borders, right?
That's what I'm
and we have
about.
very different regulations on our electricity. Our electricity, by comparison, is quite cheap, where our gasoline is quite expensive, right? And it's just all it really is regulations. That's the only difference, right? But you see down kind of in the Ontario area, down in New York area, there's some shared grids. There's a lot of Quebec hydro and Ontario hydro sold across the borders. These are different things that exist, but this grid. Most of this components of this grid were not designed to last this long. There was no intention for them to last this long. It is very dated when people talk about national security and energy grids. It's a very real thing, right? It's something that needs to be addressed, and it doesn't really matter what the energy source is that is feeding it. It does need to be addressed. It's a dated thing, but it's when politicians on either side, I'm not going to get political here, talk about infrastructure and electricity grids, nobody gets excited, right? That's not fun. Nobody gets super excited about electricity grids. But just to kind of give you a breakdown here. Okay, so North American electricity grid, it's fed by everything, right? It's natural gas, nuclear, coal, oil, wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, you name it. They're broken up in a lot of very old, inefficient ways. It doesn't help anybody. My background is natural resources, more so on the clean energy side. But this is an ugly slide here, but this is wind. Okay, so this is your capacity. You look through the middle of North America. This is your gold mine, right? This is cheap wind, right up and down the middle in the purple.
Tornado territory, dude.
Exactly. Like it works in other places, right? But that doesn't mean it's the cheapest place. We want efficient, high producing, right? And then we move on to solar, right? You see down in this area, you guys are familiar with this area.
Yeah.
Lots of solar, right? You guys see lots of solar in Texas. And one thing I think compliment to your country is the understanding of economics and capitalism is Texas may be a very oil state. Maybe I'm wrong, but they've really bought into solar and whatnot, right? They've seen opportunities to make money off it.
Right.
Someone like myself that likes to develop renewable energy, when I look at places like California, like Texas, Phoenix, whatnot, these are places where mass scale makes sense. Like there was a energy auction in Arizona earlier this year where basically a PPA was auctioned off for, I believe it was $0.015 a kilowatt for 25 years. That is not something anybody my size is even interested in competing with, because it's $0.015 is if you're building that, your intention is to own that grid space for 100 years.
Wow.
Because if
that's
you
when
put
you're getting paid back.
Well, it's not that it's going to take you that long. It's going to take you maybe 12 years, right? But do you want to do you want to put in 100 million and get it back in 12 years?
No way, man. 12 days.
Exactly, right? So the intention is, though, if you take up that large of a span on the utility, on the grid, the chances are when your 25 years comes up, the easiest thing for them to do is give it back to you because you're already tied in, you're already linked. And once you are tied in, you can up that a lot cheaper, right? Because cheaper every year. And once your grid tie-in is in, let's say you have to replace every solar panel on the grid and you're not going to have to do that in 25 years, but let's say you did. in a project like that, it's going to be way cheaper. The racking's there, the grid tie-ins there. They can do it for half the cost, right? So it's a long play by very, very large companies and corporations.
It's interesting that the Permian's got a good spot for a solar chance. I mean, that's basically right where it turns from a good red, I'm assuming, for solar energy to the yellow. That's
where
pretty much the Permian.
That's where right outside of Alpine, there's that big solar farm there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, humongous solar farm outside of Alpine.
And what I like about, go ahead, Brian.
And it doesn't. I don't know that particular solar farm you're talking about, but a lot of these like big scale famous solar farms might have been developed 10 years ago, 20 years ago with giant government help, right? They may have even pushed up your electricity prices because that's just the reality of it, right? It was a new technology. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in California over the years where California bought into clean energy, and that was their choice by their citizens, but it did push up the prices. But at the same time, it's important to understand the full scale of the conversation where if someone like myself develops a large farm in California now, it's pennies. It is incredibly cheap energy, and California doesn't have to pay much for it because A, they know it produces a lot, B, they know there's tons of competition. But at the very start of it, they bought into, help grow the industry. It was something they bought into. So there is a bit of a misconception from time to time with solar and wind where they'll say, well, the prices went up. They did. And it was a direct effect of that quite often. It happened in Ontario with one of the worst managed renewable programs I've ever seen in my life, where they overcompensated solar developers up to 25 cents, right? And it shot everybody else's price up, and it didn't make sense. Wow. It was a
mess.
It was a mess, and that's the truth of it, right? It doesn't mean that solar now or wind now has that effect. In a lot of cases, it'll bring it down. There's actually a recent story in New Mexico there where the electrical utility bought out the coal agreement they gave them $40 million to walk away because the solar agreement they could take would save them $70 million, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's growing technology, and it's one of those things you buy in early. Yeah, it's not a great investment. There's no doubt, but it is.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
man,
please.
you got my juices going because I want to kind of just put it out there.
Sure.
And I don't mean to offend anybody by this, but coal and when I look at the operations of them taking, these building size holes 3,000 feet into the ground, dropping a pod that looks like something that would survive on Mars, and everyone's in fucking space suits, and then they're shooting them out into the coal beds, and then they open up the hatch. Can you imagine being in that thing, dude, in a mask 5,000 feet under the planet, and your job is to get the coal out of the ground? What does that even mean? And I get it. The technology and the engineering to do that is absolutely incredible. We need the energy. It's there. It's a business, but man, I just feel like, are we, it's 2020, man. I don't know.
And I think that ties into the, the overall cost of capture, right? Of that resource and the energy that it takes to extract that resource. And that's where I know I had an interesting conversation a while ago. I think I was pretty toasted, but it was with Ronco. And
those are always good combos.
Yeah, it was a good convo. And we were talking about instead of shutting down coal plants in a lot of these areas, especially on the East Coast, like the Marcellus area,
right,
converting those into natural gas because they have an overabundance of natural gas there.
Right.
And it burns cleaner, it burns more efficiently, and you're getting a lot more out of natural gas than coal.
If you want to create something, Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump, for something that I will be happily to pay my taxes for, allow everyone that's in the coal industry first right of refusal of new jobs in gas, man. Let's make this transition, provide these companies with the subsidies to make this transition. And I'm happy for that. I'm happy for that transition. And so are they. Yeah. So are they. The generations of people that have done this coming out, man. I mean, just Google coal and you'll go down a rabbit hole of just, wow, we need to stop.
And there's a lot of these jobs that are, from my perspective, that completely that you can move from one industry to the other a lot easier than people think. right? Even one thing we've talked about before is geothermal. There's a big Canadian company that has a new concept. We've talked about it before with the kind of the underground radiator and basically heat pushing up, and it's just a loop as opposed to your typical geothermal. But these are drilling rigs that are drilling these out, right? And I very much appreciate. I don't want to see anybody lose their job. That's not my mentality. I live in an oil province, right? Where when oil is down, you know it. And I do think we do need to diversify a little bit and have other plans for sure. And I'm not a coal guy for sure. And we have 40% of Alberta's grid is coal, which from my perspective, we have a lot of natural gas. I don't even, I'm in clean energy, but even if I was in oil and gas, I wouldn't understand that. That does not make sense to me. You know, I think there's a better way. And even if my way goes forward, you know, like even if my agenda was to move forward and half of that had to be natural gas, how is that a bad thing?
Right. Exactly. But then, there comes that point of, you know, you do need to find that balance between a couple of different, you know, energy sources. And that's where these maps that you're showing play a huge role in that, right? In the Southwest, solar is great. Up in Minnesota, ain't going to work so well. Or up in Seattle where it's raining, you know.
Like it works, but it's like we talk about, like putting it on your house. Sure. If you're going to do a massive solar farm, there's lots all across both of our countries, but you have to understand what's the word I'm looking for, what the production is going to be. And like we talked about the economics, right? Like places like New York have very expensive electricity, especially compared to Canada. So you can build a solar farm and you can make money off it. But in the grand scheme of things, it needs to be looked at as what is best for the state and its people, and what do they want? If a state wants to invest in it, great. I'm a big believer in democracy. While I am a clean energy advocate, it's telling some state or some country that they need to do it your way because you believe that doesn't make any sense, right? It's not going to happen. But just to kind of further this along a little bit here, as I move along, this is hydro, right? And hydro, I don't think, I could be very wrong, I don't think you're going to see a lot of new production in hydro. Hydro is what it is. It's an extremely efficient source, but it is where you got it, right? We talked about pump storage before. There's a lot of resource there. I'm also a big believer in a few different technologies of tidal. If you look up in the Bay of Fundy, I don't know if many people in the States know where the Bay of Fundy is, but it's in our eastern coast. There's a big bay up there, and it's considered kind of the holy grail of tidal energy.
Oh, wow.
And there's 2 gigawatts of tidal energy up there. And a company that I'm friends with, actually, Jupiter Hydro, they have developed the latest technology of tidal.
Yeah. And capturing the moon's effect on our oceans, man.
That's
some energy, man.
I was going to say that's the area where it has the greatest difference between high and low tide, right? Especially when it's a spring tide.
Yep.
Oh, is that what it
2
is?
2 gigawatts is an insane amount of power. And that power, for anybody who knows the Canadian Maritimes, like that is not power they would consume. The idea is for them to sell it to New York.
Wow.
Right? Because New York wants cheap power, and they can produce it easily.
Wow.
Anyway,
that's probably a backdoor deal happening there. All right. Now, here's my question, and kind of where I want to transition this to, because we're going to hit up against the wall, maybe 15, 20 more minutes on the subject, and we're learning as we go, man. I think 2 hours for something like this is just, it might not just be enough. I mean, there's so much interesting things happening and being said, and we want to address the folks that are still captivated by this and have the questions that we need to hear. So what I wanted to bring up was the idea that, you know, you have the Permian Basin, who is the most stable hydrocarbon generator in America. It's also sitting right on top where good solar energy could be had. I mean, that's where innovation and birth and innovation can really come together, and we can be the front runners efficiently, because the oil is there, the hydrocarbons there, the gas is there. We could be the face of that transition at the Permian Basin, and maybe call it 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is. I thought it was very interesting to see that, because then in Arizona, you don't have it, right? You don't have an oil and gas play in Arizona necessarily. You got a ton of sun, though. So, I mean, it's not going to work there as well as it works in the Permian. So just the idea of studying our locations around the planet in the sense of what is the most efficient, collaboration that we can make today that's going to provide the most sustainable future and energy for the future. So, man, I just wanted to throw that in there. I thought that was
absolutely. And it's, you can't knock good areas in the Permian that are producing high, and like oil and gas isn't going to disappear tomorrow, no matter what anybody on the clean energy side wants. It's going to be a long play, right?
right.
No matter what anybody's goals are, and we need to have
a
realistic conversation, right? And there's a good fit in the middle, right? And that was one of those things where we talked about the other day, was the concept of a super grid. And this is kind of what I'm showing here, is these 3 high voltage DC lines. This was presented actually and studied by your Department of Energy. Concept is 3 high voltage DC lines across. Its cost is expected to be about $80 billion, which is a lot of money for sure. But
let me just get one of those billion.
If you look at energy or electricity, right, in the States, you're many, many trillions. And putting this in place, the estimation, this is 2 years out, they're going to finalize the study. The preliminary study says 3% savings on electricity costs, just on waste of heat, right? The longer it goes, AC basically, well, Tesla was right. AC made sense at the time. Truth is, DC now makes more sense because we can go in a higher voltage, right? And super grids on top of smart grids, like, it's a very complicated thing. But this is a situation, we talked about different areas, right, that can produce more efficient. And that's something we talked about before, Skip, is just getting cheap energy, right? Cheap energy, throwing it on the grid where it makes the most sense. Finding that middle ground where the economics is the answer, and then everything else around it can sort itself out in reality. Like when we talk about electric vehicles and all that sort of stuff, that's going to be decided by consumers, right? That's not I don't see that as a public policy issue as much, or anything like this.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts, really.
So looking at this map and doing this high voltage, these red lines that are coming through North America, talk to me about, if you have anything to say, and we can leave it alone if you don't, but what kind of anomalies would we find along this line of an incredibly energy disruptive technology?
I'll put it this way. DC is a lot different in how it works compared to AC, right? When you get an AC magnetic field, it goes in and out and in and out. And there's I'd be the first guy, my background is electrical, but I wouldn't live near a substation. I'm one who has a great deal of respect for the power of magnetism and some of the studies of cancer rates near substations and stuff like that.
Oh, shit.
But that's a substation. That's not a power line, right? And these are smaller, higher voltage. It makes more sense. And this is a very simplistic version of it. There's a lot of studies going on. I wouldn't run these through neighborhoods. I'm not going to, BS that. That doesn't make any sense at all. Gotcha. These wouldn't be direct lines through any country. Like, it's pretty close to Denver, it shows there. You wouldn't just run it through. But as you would agree, I think probably the American Midwest, there's a lot of space there. While we talk about producing tons of wind there, there's not enough people to consume the energy. You can build wind farms till you're blue in the face, but somebody has to use it, right?
Yeah.
So,
dude, so just to jump ahead a little bit,
we have a question from the pegs in the chat.
Let's go.
Thoughts. He wants to know if you have any thoughts on the film. What is it? The Planet of Humans.
Yeah, I expected we'd hear from that.
I didn't hear from that. What is that?
It's a Michael Moore documentary. From my perspective, I'm not going to say that nothing in it is correct. I'm not going to BS you on that. It's a frustrating film from people on my side of the fence, because a lot of it, it's from just to kind of give you a comparison. It's like talking about oil pre-fracking, right? As far as economics. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they talked they showed a lot of solar panels that were 12 years old, and we're kind of in the glory phase of efficiency of solar. Is it going to get better? Yes, but how much better? I really don't know. There's a lot of debate on that. But the panels that they showed stuff like that. They showed a lot of misleading information from my perspective. Okay, I'm not a big biomass guy. They really beat up biomass. I don't know the economics of biomass, all the emissions, all the negatives of cutting down forests. There's a lot of allegations made on biomass, and I don't have enough background in biomass to debate it. It might be 100% true for all I know. But there was a lot of very misleading information in it as a whole. And I mean, I could talk for 4 hours about it. It's if you want to go on LinkedIn and read 15 different opinions of it, you could go for days, right? It's both sides of it have very interesting points of view. I'll put it that way.
Does that answer the question, Pegs? Can we get like a thumbs up or something in the chat? Or do you want like a little more elaboration?
I mean, maybe one point to make would be all energy has a cost, right? It doesn't matter what it is. There is a negative side effect, whether it be emissions, whether it be garbage, whether it be this, whether it be that. Comments like the disposal of solar panels or wind turbines or stuff like that. Of course, that needs to be either factored into a project cost or it needs to be dealt with, right? And it doesn't matter what energy source you're building as a generator, whether it's coal or whatever, it needs to be cleaned up at the end of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that I think you can pick apart any energy source, nuclear, anything, and say, well, these guys didn't do a very good job cleaning up. And there were some examples of that were fair, but what they claimed afterwards, they got a little beat up on that film afterwards by criticism. But what they claimed afterwards that I completely agree with is that sustainability is a bigger part of this, right? For people who are concerned about emissions like myself, when you look at stats, just as much emissions were reduced last year on efficiency as adding renewables, right? So efficiency, when you talk about EOR, stuff like that, efficiency as a whole is massively important. It doesn't matter if it's on your house, changing light bulbs. It's massively important. It cannot be discounted. And I agreed with them on that. I did.
That's a good transition. I don't know where we're going with that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought I'd throw this slide up as kind of how we end this thing, if you don't mind, Brian.
Yeah.
Skips, we good?
We got another question, if that's okay. Just one last one. This will be the last one. This is from Kyle. He says, where is the progress of black holes created on solar panels in 2009 by Taijun Qi and Quang Cheng at the Southeast University of, I'm botching all these names.
I heard of this.
Nanjing, China, to increase productivity of solar panels. That is out of my pay grade. Brian?
It might be out of mine. I'm not familiar with this study. And when you're talking 2009, I mean, you're talking about 8% efficiency panels when we're at like 25 now. Just to give you an example, the panel behind me came out about a year and a half ago. It's a 300 watt panel. I can buy a 600 watt panel now for virtually the same price.
Wow.
Right. Like efficiency is upgrading, sizes get a little different, this and that, but it's constantly changing.
Also the market, right? Now you have more
100%.
People creating solar panels and, they're finding more effective ways to make them. Yeah.
And I heard of this study, dude. It's basically a solar panel that acts as if it's a black hole. It sucks in energy. It doesn't just sit there and take it. It has some ability of pulling it in. And
I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds really interesting. I'm always interested to lose more for sure.
Dude, Kyle,
so
great question.
And excuse the just me late night talking about this slide, but what I'm getting at is you see this gap here.
Bullet points would have worked, dude.
Sorry, dude. No, it wasn't for presentation purposes. I just pulled this up for because I really want Brian's opinion on this. If coal can be replaced, which is making up arguably a quarter or whatever you want to call this percentage of the total demand of energy being transferred into consumption, there are slivers of the renewable. I mean, you got hydropower, you got everything that's to come, and that seems to be more efficient in such a small percentage of what is actually providing the energy. So if we can shut down this much area of the curve, and in the next 10 to 15 years, Brian, in your opinion, bias, hashtag not bias, what is it in this group of renewable energy that's actually going to fill that void?
I would say all of the above is the truth of it. And in 10 years, there are studies that say you can do it in 10 to 15 years. I'm doubtful. I'm very doubtful, to be perfectly honest with you. I look at the clean energy industry as very much in its infancy. There hasn't been a lot of support for a belief in it. 10 years ago, I didn't think this made any economic sense. I didn't. 5 years ago, I was doubtful, right? Like we've finally hit that point where it makes economic sense. It can't just be.
Awesome.
Many of my friends were pushing this 10 years ago because it was something they cared about.
Yeah.
It can't just be something that we care about because our world just isn't that way, right? That's my opinion. And I think it's there now. But you look at some of these auctions that are going to happen in New York for massive wind farms, right? Like These are things that can happen. They can be at economic, and you can even do some of these as auctions, right? So you say lowest price wins. You can even have a line that says if you're not below what the coal is, then you don't get the contract, right?
Yeah, rightfully so. You bring up a good point. I was thinking, all right, what do you got, Skips? You got something to...
Okay. Yeah. I'm just kind of going through the Q&A. There's some pretty good questions in here. So I want to, you're sparking the people.
No, we're going to cut it. We're going to cut it on who can actually show up on stage right now. That's who gets to ask their questions. So there's amazing questions. Who's ready to come up on stage right now while I keep ranting about this? When you were talking about, the idea that what is going to actually replace this void and how are we going to manage this situation? And you said it perfectly, to the individual. And that's where we constantly want to come back to, is that from us and individually, we can provide a solution that is most efficient. And it doesn't evolve emotions. It's not politically driven. It doesn't evolve an emotional attachment to the idea. 10 years ago, people were emotionally attached to the idea that we need cleaner energy. Stop it. We're not emotionally attached anymore. Stop it. We are looking for efficiency. It's our responsibility as scientists and engineers pushing forward renewable energy to stop it. Remove the emotion. What is efficient? What is effective? And let's be inspirational in our ability to come together as geoscientists and engineers across the globe to come up with something that's effective and that actually works for the person generations from now, not today, not emotionally driven. It's built on facts, data, science, and we're coming up with real solutions. We got to be that reflection for people that's watching. And I think politics will follow. I think everything else will follow. Remove emotion. Get over yourself. Remove emotion. Just go to the facts. Look at the data. Make a conscious effort at making an attempt to fix the situation emotionless. That's so important to the individual, I think.
Absolutely. We're all going to have different beliefs, right? We need to find common ground. Economics is the easiest common ground. It absolutely is, from my perspective. Every energy source is going to have different possibilities in different regions, right? Worldwide, absolutely worldwide.
That's right.
Right. So there's a lot of different options. Like I've said,
emotions are going to get in us trouble. We don't want trouble.
Absolutely.
We want answers.
I like the concept, like I've talked about before, of a super grid because it gives you the ability to pick the cheapest source and share it here, there, and everywhere, right?
Wow. Very interesting.
It's 2022 before we know what's happening there. And we all know that my little country, which is quite large but small in population and money, will follow yours in that regard probably more than anything.
Oh, wow.
It's the truth of it.
Fun fact, before Skip goes, do you have someone to pull up on stage before we end the energy transformation?
I was going to no one has wanted to fall on the sword, but we've got a couple questions that I think are pretty simplistic, but pretty deep at the same time. If we want to, we can do one more question from the audience. How's that sound?
I'm digging it. I'm excited. I'm going to stick
Okay. So Chris asked, what kind of pollution problems does Brian see with solar, wind, and specifically batteries?
I think with solar and wind, it is all about the disposing of the source, right? The panel behind me, where does it end up 30, 40 years from now when it's done, right?
Yeah.
And while they are going to continue to work on making them more disposable, getting metals out of them, this, that, and the other thing, one of the things that is proposed in some states is basically an upfront cost, like is done with nuclear in some places, as far as basically putting money down for the disposal of the product at the end. If you're an emissions person like me, when you look at the emissions to produce it, it's typically with solar, you're between 2 and 3 years before it pays for itself. Yeah. Because as that fine film by Michael Moore likes to push, is the concept is a lot of solar cells, almost all solar cells, the cell itself are made in China. Okay. And a lot of the energy, because of the high heat energy currently that is needed to make a solar cell, is typically done in a furnace with a coal or that sort of thing. But they tend to throw it out as, well, it's coal, so why are we making solar if we have to use coal to do it? Well, how much coal do you have to use? Like it's the economics, the numbers, like we talk about, they don't really address because it's not convenient to the argument from my perspective. Right.
Very interesting.
Makes sense to me.
Wow, I can't believe this time has come and gone, Brian. We need to do it again, man. Maybe an actual podcast in person when all this lifts and we move on to the growth to come and we're back in person to person. But I was honored to share these microphones with you and this time with you, Brian. I really appreciate you taking the effort and willingness to come on the show and talk about this, man.
I really appreciate the open invitation. It's not something that we kind of do in the energy industry, and we need to start looking at it as the energy industry, not clean and fossil and all these sort of names, right?
Yeah.
Clean isn't 100% clean. I know your perspective on the term fossil, and I respect that. I get that. We're part of the energy industry, right? And a lot of us, like myself, can move between it into different segments.
That's it, man.
And let's make the right choices.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Everyone's going to benefit from that. All right, Brian, we're going to let you go, man.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian.